But now we're getting a lot more variety in tone, art style, humor. I think it's a really exciting time to be a Disney Channel fan.
Well, that didn't age well. Hello everybody, my name is JoyofCrimeArt, and it's time once again to discuss the year in review in animation. For those who are new around here, here's how this is going to go down. I will be going through 2024 in terms of animation, the new shows, the pieces of news, and anything else I just happen to find interesting. Then at the end I'll grade all the new shows from worst to best, give the year an overall grade, decide which network or streaming service won the year. Theatrical animation and anime won't be included however, as this video is already long enough as it is. Also keep in mind there'll be no way I'd be able to talk about literally every new series and piece of animation news that came out in 2024. So I'm mainly going to be sticking to the ones that matter the most to me, and the ones that are the biggest deal within the community. Let's dive right in and discuss 2024 year in review in animation. Also potential spoilers ahead for all the shows I mention.
Welcome to the Hazbin Hotel, a misguided path to redemption. Founded 5 days ago by Lucifer's delusional daughter, Charlotte Morningstar.
To start the year off, we had the release of Hazbin Hotel on Amazon Prime, based on the 2019 indie pilot created by online content creator VisiPop, finally achieving the dream that every indie creator strives for, to be bought out by the largest corporate conglomerate in the world. The series follows Charlie, the daughter of Lucifer and Princess of Hell, running the titular Hazbin Hotel, a rehabilitation center designed to reform sinners, so that they can get into heaven, in order to prevent their souls from being destroyed during the annual purges brought about by the angelic exorcists up in heaven. The best place to start with the series is with our main characters. We're all pretty good for the most part. Charlie is a fairly likable lead, being the upbeat, optimistic girl who sees the best in everyone, though still having her limits. It's a fairly typical archetype you've seen in other shows, but it's done well here, contrasting well with the dark and cynical world that she inhabits. Most of the other characters are pretty good too, with each one getting their own moment to shine, which is pretty impressive given how large the cast is. My favorite character would definitely have to be the hotel benefactor and resident Tumblr sexy man, Alistair. Something about his voice and the way he carries himself and the fact that the audience never quite knows what his motives are just make him really compelling to me. Watch in amazement as the show becomes 20% better during any scene he's in. However, while the main cast are all handled pretty well, I feel like the show struggles a bit with its tertiary cast. I wouldn't call them bad. Rather, I just feel like there's too many side characters who don't really connect all that much to the main story. I feel like the show was really hurt by the modern 8 to 10 episode rule that so many modern cartoons nowadays are hit with, and because of this, the show's pacing feels very fast. I feel like the show definitely could have benefited from a few extra episodes in order to flesh out some of these side characters, as well as show more time of Charlie actually rehabilitating some of her guests, because we surprisingly don't actually get to see that much of that, as much of the season's runtime is instead devoted to the conflict between Hell and the Angels. Though on the topic, let's talk about the conflict with the Angels. I'm not really the biggest fan of it. Granted, this may be due to me having a somewhat religious upbringing, but it just feels like such a cliche trope, you know? Like, what if the demons are the good guys and organized religion was the real bad guy all along? Bet that subverts your expectations, huh? For my next trick, what if the Superman analog was actually evil? Like, I get the angels are supposed to be a metaphor for the level of hate and bigotry that is unfortunately found in many Christian communities, but it just comes off as a bit heavy-handed. Say what you want about VisiPop's work, but it's not exactly known for its subtlety. And to be fair, there are some good angels, so it's not all black and white, but it just feels like such a tired route for the story to take. And even ignoring that, the show's messaging still comes across as messy, mostly because it tries to combine real-life allegory with its own made-up lore. Like, one of the main reasons the angels are shown to be so corrupt is because they refuse to believe that souls can be redeemed after death, which is clearly supposed to be a metaphor for how judgmental certain fundamentalist Christian groups can be, which is fair, but the metaphor kind of falls apart when the largest denomination of Christians on earth quite literally do believe that people can be redeemed after death. Broke. Hazbin Hotel is satanic propaganda. Woke. Hazbin Hotel is Catholic propaganda. Or like how the leader of the angelic exorcist is Adam, like, from the Bible. He views himself as this perfect, sinless being. Even though Adam in the Bible was a sinner, that's kind of the entire point of his story. I know that he didn't eat the fruit of knowledge in this version, but what's the point of making the character Adam in the first place then? Why not make him like Michael or something? It'd be more blasphemous, but I don't think the show is concerned with that. You can make a critique of organized religion, and you can make your own made-up lore with Christian iconography, but you have to pick one. But back to the positive, the show's animation is really good, though admittedly it doesn't look all that different from VisiPop's other series, Hello Boss, which was independently funded while Hazbin was made by a massive corporation. So you think the difference in quality would be a bit more pronounced, but even so, the series still manages to be one of the better looking shows out right now. Though I will say it can feel a bit over-designed at points. Maybe it's because I watched the show when I was sick with a cold, but the bright reds and whites and cyans really started to give me a headache at certain points. It's not to say Problem Solver is bad, but it can certainly be a bit much, though it doesn't take away too much from the show. The soundtrack is also great, featuring 2 songs in every episode, with most of the voice crew being made up of Broadway singers, all of whom do a really good job at both the musical and non-musical segments. I also want to address one of the more talked about aspects of Hazbin Hotel, and that would be the
fuck, fucking shit, fuck, bitch, dick, fuck, cunts, fuck you red piece of fuck, too much fucking red, fuck,
potty language. Like, there's nothing wrong with having swears and sex jokes in an adult cartoon, but the more a swear is said, the less impact it has. And when it's done this much, it just results in every character talking the same way. Like, wouldn't it make more sense if Charlie never swore, in order to showcase her naive innocence in contrast with the crass and vile world around her? Or maybe you could have it so the angels don't swear to contrast them more with the denizens of hell? Like, this doesn't hurt the series that much, but it makes it come across like the characters only talk this way because the writers behind the show don't know how to write dialogue in any other way. It makes the show come across as honestly kind of cringy more than anything else. Hazbin Hotel is a bit of a mixed bag. It definitely has its issues, but I do think that the good outweigh the bad. The characters are compelling, the songs are catchy, the animation, while being a bit much at times, is still good for the most part. Sometimes the show can feel like it's trying to do and say a little too much, and the show's excessive swearing and sexual humor can definitely come across as a bit edgy at times. At all times. But despite its flaws, it's still a pretty good series.
A case came in this morning that only 2 delusional narcissists would attempt, and lo and behold, they asked for you.
In a fun way, or?
But Hazbin Hotel wasn't the only offering that Amazon had this year, as we also got the second best hospital in the galaxy. A sci-fi comedy following 2 doctors, Clax and Sleech, working at a hospital in the far-flung future, while also trying to develop a cure for anxiety through dangerous and not-so-legal means. This is another one of those sci-fi adult comedy series that we seem to have gotten an influx of ever since Rick and Morty hit it big. However, if the show reminded me of anything, it would probably be Magical Girl Friendship Squad. Heck, the characters even look kinda similar. Our 2 leads, Clax and Sleech, are alright main characters, with Clax being the neurotic voice of reason and Sleech being the brilliant but lazy slacker who has trouble opening up to people. Not the most unique characters by any means, but the series actually manages to give them a bit of nuance as the series went on. Same goes with several of the supporting characters, even if some are definitely more interesting than others. One thing I really appreciate about the show is how both of our leads are actually good at their jobs. It's kind of refreshing, especially given how it would have been so easy for them to be portrayed as more incompetent, since it would open the series up for more story potential and potentially come across as more quote-unquote relatable. The show plays around with different sci-fi concepts in pretty fun and unique ways. It can get pretty high concept at points. The second best hospital in the galaxy isn't the greatest thing out there or anything, like I wouldn't get to Amazon Prime just to watch it. But if you already have Amazon Prime, I would suggest giving it a look if it seems like your thing. And I've seen practically nobody talk about it. Oh man, Rooster Teeth is trending again. What did they do this time? What? Rooster Teeth got shut down? How could this happen? How was that all? Yeah, it was announced that Rooster Teeth would be getting shut down by Warner Brothers this year. I have a bit of a love-hate relationship with Rooster Teeth. On one hand, they were one of the first big internet-based production companies, and their success in the 2000s and 2010s, I believe, played a pretty big role in paving the way for a lot of the independent internet-based production companies that we see today. Not only that, but they were also responsible for a ton of beloved series over the years, from Red vs. Blue, Camp, Death Battle, Nomad of Nowhere, Ruby. First 4 volumes. Also, there's something just kind of inherently inspiring about a group of like 4 guys in Texas managing to build something so large basically from nothing. So for all the company's ups and downs, I'm always going to have a bit of a soft spot for them. That said though, yeah, while the decision to shut down Rooster Teeth was shocking, it also makes a lot of sense when you stop and think about it for like a minute, because while I'm fond of this company, it had a ton of baggage, getting into multiple controversies over the years from not paying their employees, higher-ups engaging in sexually predatory behavior, accusations of transphobia, not paying their employees again. The vice president of the company straight up put a gun to his wife's head. My god, what haven't you done? But even ignoring all of that, the company honestly just didn't seem to be in a good place financially either. I mean, when you're not even able to continue funding your flagship series without outside help, that's usually a sign that it's time to throw in the towel. There was a ton of mismanagement and bad decision making behind the scenes that I think did a lot to hurt the company. From taking a lot of their content off YouTube and making it exclusive to their own website, or someone else's website, to overspending on multiple projects that would go on to bomb, to think that this abomination would make for a good logo redesign. And we take all of that into consideration and add all of the company's other controversies on top of that, it's not surprising to see why the higher-ups would decide to pull the plug. which is sad because it actually seemed like Warner Brothers actually did try to support Rooster Teeth early on. They helped fund season 2 of Genlock, and even created 2 direct-to-DVD movies crossing over RWBY and the Justice League, seemingly as a way to help introduce the series to a new audience. But despite the company's best efforts, it didn't seem like any of these products actually did much to help widen Rooster Teeth's reach in the long term. That said, however, while I obviously would have preferred the company to not shut down, I have to say, I felt like the company had a pretty good send-off. Death Battle had released one of its most well-received seasons to date. RWBY got an epilogue series titled RWBY Beyond, which, while not wrapping up all the lingering plot points, did help give the series some closure, and had some nice callbacks to some of the series' earliest episodes. Camp Camp came back for a 5th season, and we got the release of Red vs. Blue Restoration, the final season of Rooster Teeth's first ever series, ending the over 21-year-long story in a pretty satisfying way, featuring the return of one of the franchise's most beloved villains while retconning some of the seasons that most members of the fanbase weren't really that big a fan of, but still doing it in a way that felt respectful of the people who did like those seasons. Or as respectful as you can be when you're basically saying, yeah, these seasons suck and aren't canon anymore. None of these events were ever intended to act as a send-off to Rooster Teeth, but given the timing of it all, it made for a pretty good swan song. You know, nowadays with the constant reboots and corporate mergers, we don't really get to see that many brands end. While I feel bad for all the workers who lost their jobs, seeing a company I love get a proper grand finale, I don't know, it was just kind of nice in a way. And it still isn't the end entirely. I mean, Death Battle went independent, and Viz has purchased the rights to RWBY. Whether or not they'll continue the series or not remains to be seen, but I wouldn't be shocked if we ended up getting one more season or a movie to wrap things up. While the Rooster Teeth's website may be gone, several of their series are still available to watch on other platforms. And whatever isn't has luckily been archived. Rooster Teeth might be gone, but at least we'll always have the memories. The good and the bad.
I'm Cosmo! And I'm Wanda! And here, my fairy godparents!
We also got the release of Fairly Oddparents: A New Wish this year, a sequel to the original Fairly Oddparents series. When this project was first announced, I think it would be fair to say that my expectations weren't particularly high. Sure, the original Fairly Oddparents was a great show, for a time, but the show just kept going and going, slowly devolving into a shambling husk of its former self, like when a villain is granted immortality at the cost of their soul. The amount of times the series had jumped the shark was comical. From adding a baby, to another baby, to a talking dog, to a new kid, all while the writing just got worse and worse and the characters became more and more flanderized. By the end of its run, I truly believe that the Fairly Oddparents had become one of the worst cartoons ever made, at least by a major animation studio. And after the series had just gotten a live-action reboot a few years prior that was so unpopular that Paramount Plus straight up wrote the series off for taxes, I was ready to see this franchise take a bit of a break. Especially given that a lot of Nickelodeon's other recent CGI reboots haven't exactly been known for their quality. However, as time went on, I started seeing more people online talking about the series, with people saying that the series was actually good? I know, I was shocked too. But what do I think of it? The Fairly Oddparents: A New Wish follows a young 10-year-old girl named Hazel, who was nervous over not only moving to a brand new city, but also because her brother, whom she was very close with, has just moved away to college. But Hazel's life begins to turn around when she is granted 2 magical fairy godparents, Cosmo and Wanda, who's able to grant her every wish and bring some magic back into her life. One thing that I think FOP A&W does a really good job at is taking what worked about the original series while also modernizing the aspects that feel a bit dated. Like, the original Fairly Oddparents was a great show, but was definitely a show of the early 2000s, mostly designed just to make you laugh, and occasionally give a pretty obvious life lesson. But in this series, there's a much greater emphasis on things like character development, with the series even having a changing status quo, which really helps the show stand out as its own thing. Even if that does result in the series losing some of that trademark cynicism and edge that the original series had. I know it might sound a little bit silly to say that the original Fairly Oddparents series was edgy, but hey, that just shows how weak this current generation has gotten. Hazel's an alright main lead. He can feel a bit like a generic kid character at points, though to be fair, so could Timmy. But I think it'd give her enough unique traits to make her stand out, like how she's kind of neurotic, has a tendency to overthink things, something that I bet a lot of kids watching the series would be able to relate to. I like how Cosmo and Wanda's relationship has also become a lot less volatile compared to how it was in the later seasons of the original show, though I'm not really a fan of how it feels like they had to dumb Wanda down in order to achieve this. She's still smarter than Cosmo, but not really by much. I feel like you still could have had their relationship be stronger while keeping her as more of the straight man. Something I also like is that there's a lot more emphasis placed on the human characters, which is refreshing given how that aspect of the original series was de-emphasized as time went on. Hazel's friends, Jasmine and Wynn, are passable, though I'd be lying if I say I ever really got that invested in either of them. My favorite character would definitely be Dev, the mean rich kid / rival to Hazel. Like, yeah, we've seen the rich kid with a neglectful parental figure trope like a million times at this point. Heck, we've even seen it within this franchise before. But I think the series does a good job of making Dev fairly interesting. You're sort of unsure while watching the series if they're going to go down the typical route of giving him a redemption arc, or if they're going to keep him as the antagonist, and I kinda like that. Halfway through the series, he ends up getting his own godparent, Poof, or Perry as he's called in this series. Yeah, apparently Poof is seen as a gay slur in the UK, so they had to change the name. Why this was never a problem for the original show, I don't know. But I like Perry here, even if he doesn't really do all that much in the grand scheme of things. I really like his design. They turned him into a sexy Tumblr man. And I like how his voice is clearly modeled after Kazuo's voice from the original Oh Yeah cartoon shorts. And I think the concept of a fairy and a god kid who don't get along with each other is a pretty interesting one. The animation, I'm kind of mixed on. They did a really good job transferring the original series style into 3D, which is impressive given how flat the old show looked. But certain things just look a little off to me. The character's hair and some of the objects can sometimes look a bit too realistic compared to the other objects around them. Whenever a character isn't the main focus of a scene, they barely move, and the show is forced to recycle a lot of background characters and set pieces. It's not the worst thing ever or anything, but you sort of get the impression that the show didn't have that high of a budget. The writing is also a bit hit or miss for me. Sometimes it really works, especially with the character stuff, but other times it can feel a bit sloppy. Like the old show had a pretty basic formula. Timmy makes a selfish and impulsive wish, it backfires, and he learns a lesson. And this show tries to go for a similar thing, but since Hazel is a less selfish and impulsive character than Timmy was, the show has to come up with some pretty contrived ways in order to make things go wrong. Most of the bad things that happen in this series don't happen because of Hazel's wishes, they happen because of Cosmo and Wanda's incompetence. Not only that, but Cosmo and Wanda's powers also feel a lot more limited than they were in the original series. So many episodes have them unable to make a wish because of some arbitrary rule or restriction that definitely wasn't there in the original series, and they come across as kind of cheap. While I don't think I'm as big of a fan of this continuation as a lot of other people online are, I can easily see why the series had grown the positive reception that it has. You can tell there's a lot of love for the original series put into the show, and I think it does a good job at keeping what made the original show great in the first place, while also updating it and adding its own unique ideas. And despite my issues with the series, it's still probably the best thing to come out of the Fairly Oddparents franchise since, like, the Bush administration, so you gotta give it props for that. Adult Swim continued their foray into the nostalgia market this year following the massive success of its Checker Pass block with the launch of Toonami Rewind, a programming block dedicated to airing what else classic programming from the old school Toonami days every Friday evening from 5 to 7 p.m. Same time that Toonami used to air during the Cartoon Network days. It was both really cool and really depressing depending on how you want to look at it. I never imagined anything like this would ever happen. But honestly, doing a block like this makes perfect sense given the current state of Adult Swim. I mean, they need to air something relatively family-friendly from 5 to 7, and by adding Toonami shows, it not only adds some decent variety to the lineup, but also runs the possibility of attracting a brand new audience as well. The shows that launched were Sailor Moon, Dragon Ball Z Kai, and the OG Naruto, all big heavy hitters. It's a little odd seeing Naruto here given how it never aired on Toonami's weekday lineup, but I kinda like the anachronism. It helped give Toonami Rewind a bit of its own identity, and staying strictly to what aired on Toonami's weekday lineup might have been a bit limiting. I saw some people online complaining about how some of the shows airing were different from the versions they aired back in the day, like how Sailor Moon is the modern Viz dub instead of the Deke one, or how they're airing the Kai version of Dragon Ball Z instead of the original. While I get that these versions aren't as nostalgic and kind of hurt the authenticity of the block, these are the superior versions to watch. Like, after the nostalgia wears off, are you really gonna want to watch the version of these shows with more filler and censored lesbians? Plus, you have to keep in mind that while this block is targeting itself to people who grew up with these shows, it's also trying to attract new viewers as well. I will miss the OG Sailor Moon theme song though. In terms of packaging, the block mostly reuses footage from the regular block, but does incorporate the red and white aesthetic from the late Tom 3 era. Again, I like the anachronism. They also have some old Toonami music in some of their bumpers, but that's kind of it, which does feel a bit disappointing. I don't know, I think after Checker Pass came out with so much thought put into the aesthetic and vibe of it all, I guess I was expecting a little bit more here. I mean, part of what Toonami fans are so nostalgic for is the bumpers. I think it would be cool if we got speeches on topics like nostalgia, or if they did like retro video game reviews. But perhaps I'm expecting a bit too much. I mean, the people behind Toonami have to focus on Rewind and the main Saturday night version of the block, so it makes sense that most of their efforts would be diverted there. but I feel like it would have been cool to see a bit more on the Rewind front. Because honestly, that's probably my biggest complaint about Toonami Rewind. It's a great block, but it's honestly not the best at being a nostalgia block. Probably due to the fact that the regular Toonami block has never really shied away from airing older series. I mean, Naruto Shippuden was airing on regular Toonami at the time of Toonami Rewind's launch, and even if we only want to count OG Naruto, that last aired on Toonami in 2015. Still a long time, but it's not like we haven't seen the show since the Cartoon Network days or anything. Heck, Dragon Ball Z Kai was airing on both the regular Toonami block and Toonami Rewind at the same time. It would be one thing if they were in two different arcs or something, but the regular Toonami broadcast is only a few weeks ahead of the Rewind airings, meaning that if you're watching both blocks, you'd be watching the same episodes just a few weeks apart from each other. Hey, you can be nostalgic for things that happened 2 weeks ago too, you know. The only really nostalgic choice was Sailor Moon, which hasn't aired since 2002, which is a really good pick, especially given how requested that series has been for so long. The block also skipped a few episodes of Naruto, which to be fair is very on brand for early Toonami, but not in a good way. Really screws over any new fans who might have been watching the series for the first time. Maybe they can re-air those episodes one day and call it the Lost Episodes. I feel like the ratings were probably a factor in this decision. I really hope the block isn't underperforming, because honestly, while I do wish the block did a bit more, I really like Toonami Rewind, and I feel like it has a lot of room to grow. Certain shows from the original Toonami would probably be too violent or sexual to air in the 5 to 7 time slots in their uncensored form. There's no way that they're going to be airing the edited versions in 2024, but there's still plenty of shows that they could air. The block has been pretty stagnant since launch due to just how many episodes the show they chose to air have. I wouldn't be surprised if they chose such long-running series just in case the block ended up being a hit like Checker Pass was and they decided to expand it to every weekday. Just eat up more of Cartoon Network's time slots, who cares at this point? But given how there's 4 time slots, only 3 shows, I could see them adding at least one more show in the future. While Checker Pass bothered me because I felt like Adult Swim was taking content away from Cartoon Network, Toonami Rewind doesn't really have this problem because, well, Cartoon Network was never going to air this. So hopefully the block continues to do well in the future. And on the topic of nostalgia, we also got the launch of MeTV Toons, a new over-the-air television network created as a joint venture between Warner Brothers and Weigel Broadcasting, one of the largest over-the-air television broadcasters in America, known for channels like MeTV, Catchy Comedy, Heroes and Icons. If you're under the age of, I'd say 60, you probably have never heard of any of these channels. They're basically channels designed to broadcast old TV shows and sitcoms from the 60s through 90s. And with the help of Warner Brothers' back catalog of content, MeTV Toons was planning to do the same thing but for animation. So, it's Boomerang. Well, yes, no, kind of. It's complicated. While the channel is primarily focused on shows from the Warner Brothers back catalog, Weigel was able to use their connections to get shows from third-party licensors as well, with cartoon historian and MeTV Toons executive producer Jerry Beck describing it as Cartoon Network from 1992 times 100 on steroids. So in addition to the Warner Brothers stuff like Looney Tunes, Tom and Jerry, and all the Hanna-Barbera crap, you have a decent amount of content from other sources, some of which Cartoon Network and Boomerang hasn't had the rights to in years, and in some cases have never aired at all. Stuff like Woody Woodpecker, Casper the Friendly Ghost, Police Academy the Animated Series, Underdog, Rocky and Bullwinkle, Police Academy the Animated Series, the 90s Beetlejuice cartoons, The Real Ghostbusters. I mentioned Police Academy the Animated Series yet because I really like airing that one for some reason. Not that I can complain too much though, as the channel honestly has one of the most varied lineup of any channels out right now, with shows running the gamut from all-time classics to some really obscure picks. Like they're airing Thunderbirds. You can't get more obscure than that. Despite claiming to be Cartoon Network in 1992 times 100 on steroids, it sure doesn't feel that way in the bumper department. Just PNGs on generic colored backgrounds. I know that TV bumpers aren't as big of a deal nowadays, and most of their budget is probably being spent on acquiring more shows, but I don't know, I just feel like they could have done a little bit more than just this. They have these cartoon college shorts that are kind of nice that talk about animation history, kind of like Toonheads. Yes, more of this please. While the channel feels a bit like a ripoff of Boomerang, I feel like there's just barely enough of a difference between the two to justify MeTV Toons' existence. Plus, one advantage MeTV Toon does have is that it's over the air, meaning that as long as MeTV Toons is available in your area and you have a TV antenna, you can watch it for free, with it being covered in over 72% of all over-the-air markets. So of course, I don't get MeTV Toons where I live. It's not like I live out in the boonies or anything either, I live in a pretty major city. If your area, like mine, doesn't get MeTV Toons over the air, you can get it on streaming platforms like Philo and Friendly. And Friendly only charges $10 $10 a month, and it comes with multiple other channels too, so it's not the worst deal in the world. I briefly considered getting it for this reason, but realistically I probably knew I wasn't going to watch this channel enough to justify that cost. But even though I probably wouldn't get the most out of the channel, I'm still glad that it exists, because a TV channel airing Frankenstein Jr. and the Impossibles on TV in 2024 is just funny.
I want to commemorate Summer of Primos.
But this is supposed to be the summer of me!
We also got the release of Primos on Disney Channel, following a young half-Mexican-American girl named Tater, who was forced to spend her summer with all 12 of her primos, or cousins. Definitely a show with a lot of baggage behind it prior to release. The series received a ton of negative backlash when the trailer was first revealed all the way back in June of 2023 for multiple reasons. The main one being that the theme song kept repeating the phrase "Oye Primos," which is apparently grammatically incorrect. Maybe. I've heard some people say that it is, while other people say that it's correct in certain context. I don't know, I don't speak Spanish, so I just have to take people's word on it. Either way, this minor grammatical error was enough to turn people's opinion against the show, with many people believing that the show wasn't even able to get the basic Spanish grammar right. How well could it possibly do it being a good piece of Hispanic representation? Not helping matters was when Tater's voice actress, Marna Velasco, decided to go online and address the criticism, dismissing all the criticisms over the Spanish grammar because Spanish was the language of colonizers, in what might possibly be one of the most smug and condescending tones ever made by man.
We're trying to make a good show for kids that feel left out, for kids that are different, for kids who don't have a full grasp on any language, no matter where they live. And if you're going to be mad at that, I don't know.
Like seriously, this level of smugness needs to be studied. There are other criticisms too, like people comparing the show to a Mexican version of Nickelodeon's The Loud House, so the Casa Grandes. To be fair, it's not like either shows own the concept of having a big family, especially since large families are more common in many Hispanic cultures. People were also upset over the name of the town being Terremoto Heights, which roughly translates to Earthquake Heights, one of the cousins being named Cutita, which, while being a real name, can also be slang for a woman's private parts, and the use of the yellow sky filter, which is often a stereotype used in American media to depict Mexico, even though the show is set in California. They really decided to speedrun these controversies with this one, didn't they? But hey, it could have been worse. They could have said Latinx. Wait, computer. Enhance! Primos, no! They hate you enough already! Primos! After the backlash, it felt like the show just kept getting delayed and delayed, to the point where I was genuinely concerned if this was going to be a High Guardian Spy situation, or if the show would just be written off for taxes. But eventually, over a year after the teaser dropped, the show would eventually come out, with a few edits being made to address some of the criticism levied against the series, like changing the name of the town to a less controversial Hacienda Hills, and changing Cutita's name to Lucita. But after all the drama, how was the actual show? In all honesty, it's actually not that bad, though I acknowledge it's not really anything all that special. It mostly just feels like your standard modern Disney Channel show. There are a few aspects that stand out to me. The show's sense of humor feels a tad more cynical and out there compared to your standard Disney Channel fare, which I kind of appreciate. And the show, while mostly being pretty goofy, will occasionally just get weirdly real out of nowhere, which I like. It kind of reminds me of a toned down version of Clarence. Tater is an okay main character, being a neurotic dreamer who's trying to find her passion in life, which is a relatable premise, though it can be one that can be kind of hard to really root for given how intentionally vague it is. Also, aren't you like 9? The other Primos run the gambit in terms of quality, which is to be expected with any cast this large. That being said though, after watching the show, I'd be lying if I said that several of the Primos didn't feel a tad too similar to characters from the Loud House. Though to be fair, there are only so many character archetypes to work with, but still, it's pretty hard to ignore. One thing I do like is the way the show looks. It has this fugliness to it, like a pug. It fits the show well, but looking at the concept art, this element could have been even more explicit.
What the dog doing?
Well, this art style is ugly, intentionally so. I honestly think I would have preferred this look more. It's way more unique. Don't you hate that? When a show has a unique art style and the concept art only for the studio to hit them with a CalArt stick. Overall, I think Primos is a pretty good show. It's not necessarily anything that special or unique, and it can be pretty juvenile at times. Like, I'm not used to seeing this many fart jokes in a Disney Channel show. I mean, the show really is going after the Loud House's crown, but I think it's a pretty good time. And if the show expands on its more compelling aspects, I could see the show becoming something pretty special. We also got Batman Cape Crusaders on Amazon Prime. The series has some pretty big names behind it, like Mike Reeves, J.J. Abrams, and Bruce Timm of Batman the Animated Series fame. Don't worry, Batman and Batgirl don't bang in this version, I promise. The show feels like it's trying to harken back to Batman the Animated Series, just like, well, pretty much most Batman incarnations over the past 30 years, but this one plays into that aspect even more, bringing Batman's noir influences to the forefront, straight up setting it in a 1940s inspired world. The most socially progressive 1940s I've ever seen. This change felt a bit odd to me. Like, it almost feels limiting in a way, like acting as if the Batman franchise hasn't grown beyond the 1940s. But the show does do a good job at capturing that more noir-inspired tone, even though part of me feels like Batman the Animated Series might have done that a bit better just due to the advantage of being animated on cells. The series makes a lot of odd changes to the Batman lore, from turning the Penguin into a woman, to turning Harley Quinn from the Joker's bubbly and codependent henchwoman to a stoic sociopath with no connection to the Joker at all. Like, Bruce Timm, I know you invented Harley Quinn and all, but I still feel like you kinda missed the point of her character. And don't get me wrong, I'm fine with changes when it comes to adaptations, but those changes should always be done for a reason. I feel like a lot of the times, especially nowadays, reboots have a tendency to make radical changes like this, not because they improve the story, but just because the people behind these series feel like they need to change something in order to justify the reboot's very existence. Like, these changes don't make the series bad or anything, but they do feel like they're changing something fundamental about the source material. The series also has a tendency to make a lot of the characters just kind of nastier than they are typically portrayed, and sometimes I think that can work, like with the Gotham police force. Typically the force is portrayed as corrupt, but on the other anime version of Batman, we're just usually kind of told how corrupt they are, but with this series being aimed at an older audience, we actually get to see a lot more of it, and I think that really works. But then we get characters like Harvey Dent, who's portrayed as evil and corrupt long before his transformation into Two-Face. In fact, he becomes a better person after having half of his face blown off, which kind of hurts the tragedy of his transformation. Again, it feels like another change just for the sake of being different. Even Batman himself is kind of a jerk, treating Alfred much more like a butler than a parental figure like he does in most incarnations. I get that that's the point, he's supposed to get better and kinder as the series goes on, but the arc just kind of falls flat for me, so it doesn't really feel like there's a lot of time devoted to it. In fact, we really don't get that much time devoted to Batman at all, which was the point of contention. I get how people would obviously want Batman to be in a Batman show, but I can also see the argument that having Batman appear less often helps make him feel more mysterious and larger than life, sort of like what they did with the Tim Burton films. I don't mind it all that much due to the fact that I actually like most of the supporting characters. Barbara Gordon, Jim Gordon, and Renee Montoya. I thought they were all pretty compelling characters to follow, though maybe the show could improve the balance a bit more in season 2. Batman Cape Crusaders did an odd series. The biggest problem is that it just doesn't seem like it knows what it wants to be. In a lot of ways, it feels like it's trying as hard as it can to play into people's nostalgia for Batman the Animated Series, with its art style, film noir aesthetic, and Bruce Timm's involvement. While the other half of the time, it feels like it's trying to do everything it can to be like, no, we're not like Batman the Animated Series. We gave Penguin tits, see? And I feel like the show really should have picked one or the other. Either be Batman the Animated Series for adults or be its own thing. But issues aside, I still walked away from the series pretty positively. But it's not making these weird changes just for the sake of it, and it's just being a Batman series. It honestly does that job pretty well. I like the film noir vibe, the side characters are all pretty engaging, the series manages to feel adult without feeling the need to be overly graphic, and it's just nice seeing another Batman cartoon, which we haven't gotten in over a decade at this point. And hopefully some of my complaints can be ironed out in season 2. Hey, remember Discovery Family? Yeah, ever since the hub rebranded to Discovery Family back in 2014, the channel has definitely been on a pretty stagnant state, kept alive by reruns of Cake Boss and My Little Pony. However, around last year, we started to see some fresh life brought into the channel. You know things are bad when this is considered fresh. Yeah, ever since Discovery bought Warner Brothers, we've started seeing more Warner Brothers content airing on the channel. Looney Tunes, The Smurfs, Sylvester and Tweety Mysteries, and this year we got even more, with reruns of Cartoon Network's Summer Camp Island and Steven Universe making the jump to the channel, as well as a rebrand, known as DFC, a rebrand that 3 months in they still don't use consistently. Definitely strange seeing these Cartoon Network shows airing alongside My Little Pony, but hey, it's at least kinda nice for the 3 or so people still watching Discovery Family. Good on you, David Zaslav. C tier. I'm just wondering what Warner Brothers' game plan is for this though. Like, it could be nothing, just an attempt to add some new content to Discovery Family without having to do any work. But it seems like as of late, Warner Brothers' anime catalog for children has been pretty scattered. Like, if you want to watch a kids show made by Warner Brothers, it could be airing on Cartoon Network, Boomerang, Adult Swim, MeTV Toons, DFC, it's all up in the air. And honestly, a lot of these channels all seem to be filling similar roles. The pessimist in me is honestly wondering if Warner Brothers is testing the waters to see how well Cartoon Network shows do on DFC, in case they ever do just want to give the whole channel over to Adult Swim, given how much growth that brand's been having over the last few years. And speaking of...
Stop!
Or what?
Or or I'll make you.
We got Invincible Fight Girl this year. Set in a world where wrestling is everything, Invincible Fight Girl follows Andy, a young girl who dreams of becoming a wrestler despite coming from a family of accountants. We follow Andy alongside her con artist and manager Craig and a wannabe wrestling journalist named Mikey as she tries to achieve this dream and become a pro. This series, just like Unicorn and Superman from last year, was originally intended to air on Cartoon Network, but was moved over to Adult Swim at the last minute due to violence, or so they claim. Now, we've seen shows on Syne with similar, if not more, violence in the series in the past. However, what might have pushed the series over the line might have been the fact that the violence here is a lot more imitatable. Due to being just wrestling, it'd be a lot easier for a kid to hurt themselves trying to mimic this than the other action shows that the channel has aired in the past. Mucha Lucha ran into similar problems when it aired, that's why all the wrestling moves in that show involved the characters shapeshifting. And this show can get pretty brutal at times, not to the point where I think a kid couldn't handle it, but out of all the shows that have moved from Cartoon Network to Adult Swim, this is the one that feels the most justified. However, counterpoint, grow a pair. That said though, I don't think the violence was the main reason the show was moved over. Because really, if the violence was the issue, then you think that Cartoon Network would have just addressed this at some point during the production stage, or they would have just not picked the series up in the first place. But the fact that they did and announced it for Cartoon Network, and only announced the move to Adult Swim a few months before air, makes me think that the show being moved had less to do with violence and more to do with the failing ratings of kids' TV nowadays. At this point, I wouldn't be surprised if Lana Longbeard ends up being an Adult Swim original. I will say though, despite being a Cartoon Network produced series, the show doesn't really feel like one. Instead, the show takes on a much more shonen anime influence, just like, well, 80% of Western cartoons made nowadays, but the series takes that influence even further than most, taking on much more of the structure of a shonen battle series. This show's pacing is really slow, but I think that works to the series' benefit. Episodes will often lead directly into each other, and fights can often span multiple episodes. There's no dumb sitcom filler like you see in a lot of other anime-inspired Western shows. The animation is also really great. It's definitely more Western influenced, but it's bright and colorful and really gets a chance to shine during the series' many action scenes, which are all really well done. I like how the show incorporates a lot of strategy into the fights, instead of fights just being decided on raw strength and the power of friendship. However, if I had any problems with the series, it's that I'd probably say that its anime influence might run a little too deep. The show does what it does really well, but if you've already seen any shonen anime before, then you've basically seen Invincible Fight Girl. If I wanted to see a generic shonen with surprisingly decent execution, I would just go watch Black Clover. Shonen is already a very formulaic genre to begin with, so if you want to stand out, you either need to have a good hook or interesting characters. I feel like the show doesn't really have either. I like Craig and Mikey, but Andy is honestly kind of bland to me. Outside of her love of wrestling, there isn't really all that much to her, and when the series follows the shonen anime formula so beat for beat, I just can't help but think of this image whenever I'm watching the show. I feel like it's trying too hard. I still enjoy the series. Like I said, the action, animation, and pacing are all really well handled, but its fairly generic story and characters do hold me back from loving it, but I could definitely see a certain audience really getting into the series, especially if you are a die-hard anime fan.
You know, I don't know how to control my powers, right?
It ignites when you're stressed, so think of something stressful.
Oh, okay, I'll go with might get killed by a demon the minute I turn 16.
And to wrap up the year, we have Jentry 2 vs. the Underworld on Netflix. The series follows Jentry, your average teenager, except for the fact that she has been gifted with magical powers that she has trouble controlling. But when an evil villain named Chang comes looking to take the power for himself, Jentry must learn to master her powers while also fighting various monsters and demons that have escaped from the Chinese underworld. This show is honestly something really special. I admit the premise is a bit cliche, it's your typical mid-2000s action show type affair, very similar to something like, say, American Dragon Jake Long or The Life and Times of Juniper Lee, but where the show exceeds is with its execution. I know I just kind of ratted on Invincible Fight Girl for having a cliche story despite having good execution, but I think what makes Jentry 2 work better in this regard is that despite using a lot of tropes that we've seen before, they don't follow them to a T, and the show still manages to mix in enough of its own ideas for the series to stand on its own, while also throwing enough genuine twists and turns to keep the audience guessing on what's going to happen next. This show's pacing is really fast. The first 10 minutes of episode 1 honestly felt like the first episode, but I think this is a good thing. This is a serialized action show aimed at an older audience on Netflix in 2024. I feel like the people behind the series knew that there was a good chance they probably weren't going to get another season, so they take advantage of every minute that they have. There's a kind of filler-ish episode about the Alamo early on, but for the most part, the series is always moving. introducing new reveals and plot points in practically every episode. They don't try to stretch it out to the mid-season finale like a lot of other shows would. Heck, the series pretty much wraps up its story by episode 10, then devote the last 3 episodes to basically giving us season 2. Like, they had to know that the series was going to be on the chopping block. The animation is really well done, looking almost like an indie comic. I love the way this show incorporates elements of Chinese mythology. One thing that I also love is that whenever you think, oh, the show isn't going to go there, a lot of the time, they do. This show can get really dark at times, and it adds so much to the stakes. The show isn't perfect though, I do have some issues with it. I was honestly a bit confused of how much people knew about Jentry and her powers. They kinda act like everyone knows about her powers after the first couple of episodes, but there's one moment near the end of the season where everyone acts surprised by it, and maybe I missed something, but it did seem a bit off to me. Also, while the show is supposed to be about how the people around Jentry need to let her make her own choices, let's be honest, a lot of the choices she makes kinda suck and get a lot of people hurt. I know she's a teenager and all, but still. Also, while these tropes have never been something that really have ever bothered me all that much, the show does deal a lot with high school teen drama and shipping and love triangles, so if that's not your thing, that might hurt the experience for you a bit. But I was really surprised by just how much I enjoyed this series. I do hope that the series is able to gain some popularity due to positive word of mouth so it can get another season, as there were a few plot threads that were kinda left hanging. But even if this is all we get, I think it still ends on a pretty satisfying note. And that was 2024 Year in Review in Animation. Some observations? This year felt very quiet compared to other years, especially 2023. I think this might be a sign of what's to come for animation in the future. Back in the late 2010s, there were so many shows coming out, because there were so many different TV channels and streaming platforms all competing for your attention, with companies dumping more and more money into these projects in an attempt to beat the competition. But now, I think the costs of all these projects have started to catch up with these companies. Cable is dying, and streaming services aren't pulling in a profit most of the time either. So I think that era of throwing everything at the wall to see what sticks is kind of over. I won't be surprised if we start seeing less animated series as a whole in the next couple of years, as these companies become more and more selective of the projects they do and don't choose to greenlight. But now, on to the ranking. If I had to grade all these shows I talked about this year from worst to best, it would probably go something like... Number 7, The Fairly OddParents and New Wish. Number 6, The Second Best Hospital in the Galaxy. Number 5, Primos. Number 4, Invincible Fight Girl. Number 3, Hazbin Hotel. Number 2, Batman, Cape Crusader. Number 1, Jentry 2 vs. the Underworld. But those are just my opinions as to the writing of this review, because in all honesty, a lot of these rankings were really close this year. Now on to the grade. If I had to grade this year, I think I would give it a B. It was definitely a quiet year, but looking at all the shows that came out, even though I do have my problems with some of them, I don't think I would count any of them as straight up bad. And as for which channel or streaming service won the year, I think I would have to give it to Amazon Prime, who honestly had a pretty packed year between not just Hazbin Hotel and Batman Cape Crusader, but also for series I didn't have time to check out, like Sausage Party Foodtopia and Secret Level featuring the cast of Concord. You're lucky that Hazbin Hotel and Batman Cape Crusader were decent. But that's just all my personal opinion. What are your thoughts on 2024 in animation? What shows were your favorite and least favorite? Are there any notable series that I missed? Leave your thoughts in the comments down below. I genuinely want to hear what you all think. If you like this video, feel free to like it, subscribe, and check out my Patreon if you want to see more videos like it. And as always, have a great day.